FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
The idea of freedom, so central to American culture, is not a fixed or permanent thing. It is the subject of persistent conflict and debate in American history. And the freedom train points to two of the issues around which those debates have revolved, and what I want to talk about. One is the meaning of freedom, the definition of freedom, what you think freedom is, and the other is the boundaries of freedom, you might say, or who is and who is not entitled to really enjoy American freedom. At key points in our history, these questions have taken on a constitutional meaning, and they remain controversial today. What is freedom and who is entitled to it? Those questions remain unresolved as we speak today. Now, I'm sure you'll agree that no idea is more central to our sense of ourselves as Americans than freedom or liberty, with a word, those two words are usually used pretty interchangeably by Americans. The Declaration of Independence lists liberty as second only to life itself as one of the inalienable rights of mankind. Freedom is frequently invoked to rally support for wars. The United States fought the Civil War for a new birth of freedom, according to President Lincoln. World War II, as I mentioned, for the four freedoms. And the current war in Iraq was given the title, as you know, Operation Iraqi Freedom. Americans' love of freedom has been represented by liberty poles, liberty caps, and statues of liberty. It's been acted out by burning stamps and burning draft cards, by running away from slavery, and by demonstrating for the right to vote. Obviously, other people also cherish freedom, but the idea, the word, seems to occupy a more prominent, persistent place in our public discourse than in many other countries. Every political issue in American history seems to eventually come down to some question of freedom or its absence. Every man in the street, white, black, red, or yellow, wrote Ralph Bunche in 1940, every man in the street, white, black, red, or yellow, knows that this is the land of the free and the cradle of liberty. And as groups from the 19th century abolitionists to modern-day conservatives have realized, to capture, you might say, a word like freedom for your program gives you a position of formidable strength in political debates. But perhaps because of its very ubiquity, as I said, the history of freedom in America is really a story of debates and disagreements and struggles, rather than a timeless category or definition or an evolutionary narrative toward a preordained goal. Rather than seeing freedom as this fixed category, I think it's better to see it as what philosophers call an essentially contested concept, which by its nature is the subject of disagreement. And the meanings of freedom have been worked out not only in Supreme Court decisions or congressional debates, but at every level of society, on slave plantations and labor picket lines, and even in people's parlors and bedrooms. So if freedom's been a battleground in our history, so also has been this other question of the boundaries of freedom. Who is entitled to enjoy it? It's hardly original to point out that the United States, founded on the premise that it was a beacon of liberty to the world, blatantly deprived many of its own people of freedom. 1/5 of the population was slaves at the time the Constitution was written. And efforts to limit freedom in one way or another have been a persistent feature of our history. Maybe more to the point and a little less obvious is that people's ideas of freedom are often defined by their limits. The freedom of the master rested on the slavery of the slave. People in the South before the Civil War insisted, without any real sense of contradiction, that the freest person was the slave owner. Slavery was the foundation of genuinely free society because it liberated you from the necessity to labor. You could devote yourselves to politics, to culture, to the arts, if you happened to have slaves. That was a kind of freedom that a lot of people didn't enjoy. The autonomy of men often seen as the independent man, as seen as an essential attribute of freedom, rests on the subordinate position of women. And this is why it's often through these battles at the boundaries, the struggles of people who are denied freedom as they understand it, that the idea of freedom has been redefined and expanded throughout our history.